Texas, United States, September 17, 2014. The sun was setting over a forgotten dirt road when something that should never have happened did. That night, an armed gang advanced on an isolated farm, certain that no one would appear. There were no police nearby. There were no cameras. There were no witnesses. Everything indicated that it would be just another violent land grab, quick, silent, and without consequences. But they made a mistake that they would only realize too late. The owner of that farm didn't run. He didn't grab a weapon. He didn't try to negotiate. He prayed. What happened in the following minutes left armed men in a panic, changed destinies forever, and to this day does not appear in any official report. You are about to hear one of the most impressive stories ever told about the presence of Jesus, an account that wasn't recorded by cameras, but left a mark on the lives of everyone who was there that night. Hello, welcome to this video about untold stories of Jesus. Before we begin, I invite you to write Amen in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from and the exact time right now. Leave a like, because this story might touch someone who needs to hear it today. Now, take a deep breath, because what happened on that farm, nobody was prepared to explain. It was September 17th, 2014, a Wednesday, too ordinary to end the way it did. The sun was beginning to set over the interior of Texas, spreading an orange light over miles of dry land, old fences, and seemingly endless fields. In that isolated stretch of the county, there was only a dirt road, used almost exclusively by ranchers' pickup trucks, tractors, and occasionally a lost hunter. The farm was far from everything. There was no nearby town, nor neighbors within reach of a cry for help. The place was known only as Rancho Miller, passed down from father to son for more than 3 generations. Anyone passing by would see a red barn aged by time, a small corral, a simple white wooden house, and an old cross planted near the main gate, something that many found strange, while others simply ignored. Around 6:12 p.m., the silence of that late afternoon was broken by a sound that didn't belong there. The noise of engines. It wasn't a tractor, nor an ordinary pickup truck. They were 2 dark SUVs, with tinted windows, slowly advancing along the dirt road, raising a cloud of dust that seemed to swallow the horizon behind them. Inside the vehicles, the atmosphere was different from what one could see outside. There was no casual conversation, no laughter, only tense stares, firm hands, and weapons hidden under baggy jackets. Those men weren't there by mistake. They weren't lost. They knew exactly where they were going. The gang was known in the surrounding area, unofficially not in the newspapers, but truck drivers, small business owners, and some farmers had already heard of them. A violent, organized group that had been expanding into the countryside, taking advantage of isolation, fear, and the absence of witnesses. They didn't just steal money, they seized land. The plan was simple: intimidate, expel, occupy. Whoever resisted paid the price. When the SUVs pulled up in front of the ranch gate, one of the engines remained running. The other shut off slowly, as if the silence were part of the threat. 5 men got out, all armed. None of them looked older than 40. 2 wore low-top caps, another had a leather jacket, and the leader, recognizable by his posture, carried a rifle slung over his shoulder as if he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. On the other side of the fence, the farm owner watched. His name was Ethan Miller, 58 years old, a widower with no children living with him. A simple man of few words, his hands marked by hard work and his face tanned by the sun. He was on the porch of his house, holding a cup of already cold coffee, when he heard the engines approaching. Ethan didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't grab a gun. He just stood there, staring. As the men approached the gate, one of them pushed the wood forcefully, making the chain creak. The sound echoed across the empty field. Another gave a short, mocking laugh, as if he had done this many times before. "Hey!" shouted the leader. "The land now has new owners." The voice pierced the open space with ease. Ethan heard every word. He descended the 3 porch steps slowly, as if trying to buy time, not to escape, but to understand. He walked a few meters toward the fence, keeping a safe distance. "You're in the wrong place," he replied, his voice firm, without shouting. "This land is registered. It has a deed, and I'm not selling it." One of the men spat on the ground. "We're not asking for anything." Another one slammed his hand on the rifle just to make it clear what was at stake. The wind picked up at that moment, stirring up dust and making the wooden cross near the gate creak slightly. A small detail, almost imperceptible, but Ethan looked at it for a second, as if searching for something there. "Last chance," minutes, said the leader, now walking a few steps ahead. Grab what you can carry and start walking. Today, the silence that followed was heavy. There were no birds. There were no insects. It was as if the entire place was holding its breath. Ethan took a deep breath. His eyes weren't filled with hatred, nor with panic. There was something different there, a mixture of sadness, weariness, and conviction. This land is not only mine, he said. It never was. The men exchanged confused glances. Whose is it then? One of them said sarcastically. Ethan lowered his head for a moment. His lips moved, almost silently. When he spoke again, his voice was low but clear. Before anything else, I'm going to pray. The reaction was immediate. Laughter, mockery. One of the men shook his head in disbelief. He's gone mad, said another. Or he's stalling for time. The leader raised his hand, ordering the others to be quiet. He was now watching Ethan intently. Something about that man didn't fit the mold. There was no desperation. There was no negotiation. Just a strange, unsettling calm. And then, right there, in front of armed men, in the middle of an isolated Texas farm, Ethan closed his eyes. He knelt slowly on the dry ground. He placed his hand on the soil, and he began to pray. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was simple. And at that exact moment, without anyone noticing yet, something began to change. The wind suddenly stopped. The air grew heavy, and one of the men in the gang felt an inexplicable shiver run down his spine. They didn't know it yet, but that night would not end like all the others. And what was about to happen, no one there would be able to explain it afterwards. While Ethan Miller remained kneeling on the dry ground, the gang members didn't know what to do. This wasn't part of the script. In dozens of previous raids, there had always been shouting, running, pointed guns, threats, tears. But never silence, never prayer. To understand why Ethan didn't run away, we need to go back in time. Ethan was born on that same land in 1956, when the ranch was still just a simple house surrounded by wild fields. His father, Caleb Miller, was a tough man, one of those who believed more in work than in words. But there was one thing Caleb never neglected: faith. Every Sunday, without exception, the family gathered around the kitchen table. It didn't matter if it was raining, if the cattle had escaped, or if the harvest was late. The Bible was opened, a prayer was said, and Caleb always repeated the same phrase to his son: "This land doesn't belong to us. We only take care of it." Ethan grew up hearing that without fully understanding it. Only many years later would those words gain real weight. At 22, Ethan tried to escape his fate as a farmer. He moved to Houston, worked in auto repair shops, then as a driver. He married young. For a brief period, he believed he could build a different life away from the countryside. But the city brought him more losses than gains. In less than 6 years, he lost his father, his mother, and shortly after his wife, a victim of an aggressive disease. No children, no roots in the city. Aimless. That's when he went back to the ranch. Upon returning, he found the house silent, covered in dust, with his father's Bible still open on the table, at the exact same psalm he had read the last Sunday before he died. Ethan never told anyone this, but that night he slept on the living room floor and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. That's where something changed. From then on, Ethan lived almost invisibly. He didn't frequent bars, didn't get involved in arguments, didn't carry a weapon. To many, this seemed like weakness. To him, it was conviction. He believed simply, almost stubbornly, that he wasn't alone in that land. Rumors about the gang had reached him weeks before that day. A truck driver warned him. A supplier mentioned it. A distant neighbor suggested he leave for a while. Ethan listened to them all. He thanked them, but he didn't leave. The night before the invasion, he slept poorly. He woke before dawn and walked to the wooden cross near the gate. He touched it with his hand and said a short prayer. He didn't ask for protection for himself. He only asked that whatever happened, he would have the courage not to deny what he believed in. Now, on her knees before armed men, that moment had arrived. "That's enough," one of the invaders muttered, adjusting his weapon. "He's playing games with us." But the leader remained silent, observing. Ethan prayed softly, but his words were clear enough for anyone nearby. "Lord, this land is yours. My life is yours. If today is the day, may your will be done. But if there is still a purpose, show your presence here." When he finished, he remained kneeling for a few seconds, as if waiting for something or someone. It was then that one of the gang members took a step back. "Did you feel that?" he asked, his voice different, less firm. "What did you feel?" Another replied, irritated. I don't know how to explain it. The air felt strange. There was no wind, hand, but the dust on the ground seemed to have settled abruptly. The sky, which minutes before had been clear, was beginning to darken faster than usual. It wasn't night yet, but the light felt heavy. The leader frowned. He had faced resistance before. He had seen men beg, threaten, go mad, but he had never seen anyone kneel with such calmness. "Get up," he ordered. "This is the last time I'm speaking." Ethan stood up slowly. He wiped his hands on his worn jeans. His eyes met the leader's. There was no challenge there, only certainty. "I'm not leaving," he said, "and you're not staying either." Silence once again dominated the place. One of the men laughed, but the laugh was short and nervous. "Who does he think he's being protected by?" he mocked. Ethan didn't answer. He just glanced away for a moment, at the field behind the men, and it was at that moment that something happened. One of the SUVs tried to start. The engine turned over and died. He tried again. Nothing. "What kind of drug is this?" complained the driver. The other vehicle, still running, began to malfunction. Lights flashing, dashboard fading. "That's impossible," another man murmured. "Those cars were serviced." The leader took a step back, now visibly irritated. "No one should panic," he said, but his voice no longer had the same authority. Ethan remained motionless. Then, almost imperceptibly, one of the men felt a weight on his chest, as if it were difficult to breathe. Another began to sweat profusely. Another put his hand to his head, confused, as if he were lost in his own body. "Let's get out of here," one of them said. "Now." But before any decision was made, they felt they were no longer alone in that field, and none of them could explain exactly why. The gang leader sensed something he had never felt before. Fear. Not the usual fear of confrontation, nor the calculated dread of a shootout. It was a different kind, a deep, irrational unease, as if every decision made there was being watched, weighed by something unseen. "That's enough," he said, trying to regain control. "We'll settle this now." With a brusque gesture, he signaled for two men to advance. They passed through the open gate, stepping onto the farm's earth as if crossing conquered territory. One of them raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Ethan's chest. "On your knees again," he ordered. "Now out of fear, not faith." Ethan didn't move. The silence was so dense that the distant sound of a cricket seemed too loud. The sky darkened quickly, in a way that was strange for that time of day. The clouds weren't storm clouds, but they formed a heavy, low ceiling, as if the world were closing in on that patch of land. "I'm already on my knees inside," Ethan replied calmly. "You just haven't realized where you are yet." The armed man laughed nervously. He pressed the trigger just enough to produce a dry click, a clear threat. Nothing happened. "Do you think this is a game?" he growled. That was when the first real sign that something was wrong became undeniably apparent. The horse that was tied up near the barn began to neigh desperately, pulling hard on the rope. The chickens in the henhouse stirred at the same time, as if reacting to an unseen danger. Ethan's dog, which had remained hidden until then, slowly emerged from behind the house, but didn't advance. He simply stopped, staring fixedly at a point in the field, a point where there was no one. "Are you seeing this?" one of the men murmured. "Shut up," another replied, trying to convince himself that it was all just a coincidence. But coincidences don't turn off engines, they don't make animals react at the same time, and they don't make armed men feel their hearts race for no reason. The leader lost his temper. "Tie him up," he ordered. "If he doesn't cooperate, we'll do it the hard way." Two men stepped forward. When they crossed the imaginary line between the gate and the house, something shifted in the air. They both slowed their pace without realizing it, as if they were walking against an invisible resistance. One of them stumbled, fell to his knees, cursing. "What the hell?" He tried to stand up. He failed. His legs were trembling. "I can't," he said, breathless. "My legs—" The other stopped. He looked at his companion, then at the leader. The fear was now visible. "Let's get out of here," he repeated. "Now." The leader raised his weapon again, but his hand wasn't steady. For the first time in years, he doubted himself. He looked around, trying to identify the source of that silent chaos, and then he heard footsteps. They weren't fast. They weren't heavy. They were calm, rhythmic steps, coming from the field to the left. They all turned at the same time. Weapons pointed towards the darkness that was beginning to form. "Who's there?" one of them shouted. No response. The footsteps continued for a few seconds, and then stopped. "This isn't possible," murmured the driver, still trying to start the SUV. "There's nobody there." Ethan, who had been motionless until then, spoke again. "You can still leave." The phrase didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. The leader gritted his teeth. His pride screamed louder than his fear. "Shoot," he ordered curtly. The man with the rifle pulled the trigger. The shot didn't fire. He tried again. Nothing. The gun, he stammered. The gun jammed. Another tried to shoot. The same thing happened. A third raised his pistol. It missed. Panic began to spread. This isn't normal, someone shouted. It's some kind of interference. Another tried to explain, even though he didn't believe it. Ethan's dog began to growl, not at the men, but behind them. The leader turned around quickly, and for a brief moment, he had the distinct feeling that someone was standing there, just a few meters away, watching. He saw no face. He saw no body, but he felt something he had never felt before. Authority. His stomach churned. Back up, he said finally. Everyone, now! The men began to walk backwards, stumbling, looking over their shoulders like frightened children in the dark. One of them fell again, crying, saying he couldn't breathe properly. Another began to pray aloud, even though he had said hours before that he didn't believe in anything. Ethan remained in the same place. When the leader reached the gate, he turned around one last time. His eyes met Ethan's, and for a second he had the strange feeling that someone was standing beside the farmer, someone who didn't need to speak. This isn't over, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. But deep down, he already knew. It was over, just not in the way he imagined. While the men tried in vain to start the vehicles, the sky darkened completely. The first star appeared high above, isolated, shining with unusual intensity. Ethan closed his eyes again. The worst was yet to come, but control was no longer in the hands of the invaders. The field was completely silent now. There was no more wind. There were no insects. Even the men in the gang seemed to speak in whispers, as if they feared awakening something that was already awake. Ethan took a few steps forward, away from the house. He wasn't walking toward the men, but he wasn't retreating either. He stopped right in the center of the open field, where the ground was firmer, marked by years of footsteps, harvests, and waiting. He took a deep breath. He was no longer afraid. "You didn't come just for this land," he said, breaking the silence. "You came because you believed that no one would see, that no one would demand anything from you." The leader tried to answer, but his throat seemed too dry to produce a sound. Ethan closed his eyes again, but this time he did not kneel. He stood up. The prayer that followed was not long. It was not rehearsed. It was not pleasing to human ears. It was direct, like someone speaking to someone they already know. "Lord, they don't know what they're doing, but you do. If there's still a way back for them, show them now. If not, bring justice here in your way." When he finished, something happened. It wasn't a flash. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't anything that could be filmed or photographed. It was a presence. A gentle yet absolute weight fell over the field. Some of the men fell to the ground, sitting down without understanding why. Another put his hands to his face, sobbing convulsively, repeating his mother's name. A third began to tremble as if he had a fever. "I can't," one of them stammered. "I can't stay here." The leader felt his heart pounding so hard, it felt like it wanted to burst from his chest. Each beat was accompanied by a memory he didn't want to revisit. Mistakes, violence, people left behind. It all came at once like a silent judgment. He tried to take a step and couldn't. It was as if the ground was too heavy. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "This isn't." And then he saw, not with ordinary eyes, not as one sees a man or a shadow. It was a clear perception, impossible to ignore. Someone was there, between the gate and the wooden cross. He didn't threaten. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his hand. I just was, and that was worse than any weapon. One of the men started shouting. "I saw it," he said desperately. "I saw someone there." Another fell to his knees, hitting his head on the ground. "Forgive me," he cried. "Forgive me for everything." The leader closed his eyes tightly, trying to deny it. When he opened them again, the feeling hadn't disappeared. On the contrary, it was stronger. He understood, in that instant, something he would never admit aloud. They never had control of that situation. Ethan opened his eyes. He wasn't looking at the men. He was looking at the field, like someone listening to instructions. "Go away," he said firmly. "Now, on foot." "The cars," someone murmured. "No," Ethan replied. "You walked in here. You're walking out." There was a moment of hesitation. Then, something that had never happened before with that group. Immediate obedience. One by one, they began to walk away from the gate. They didn't run. They didn't look back. They walked quickly, heads down, like men who had just left an invisible courtroom. The leader was the last one. Before crossing the dirt road, he stopped. He turned slowly to Ethan. His eyes were filled with something that wasn't anger. It was belated understanding. This isn't over," she said, almost voicelessly. Ethan replied without raising his voice. "For me, it's over now." The leader took a few more steps, and then felt something he would never forget. A sudden, strange, disconcerting peace. face, as if a door had been closed behind him, and another, which he did not deserve, had been opened in front of him. They disappeared down the dark road. The field began to breathe again. The engines of the abandoned SUVs began to slowly leak oil, as if they too had given up. Ethan was alone again. He knelt one last time, touched the ground with his hand, and murmured, "Thanks." He didn't know yet, but the real shock was yet to come, and it wouldn't just affect the gang. It would affect everyone who, days later, would try to explain what happened that night. Dawn slowly crept over the ranch. After the men disappeared down the dirt road, Ethan remained there for a long time, sitting on the porch step, watching the sky. The stars seemed closer that night. They didn't shine any brighter. They just seemed present, as if something had been accomplished. Around 2:17 a.m., he finally got up and went inside. He closed the door quietly, put water on to boil, and made coffee, even though he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. There was no euphoria, no sense of victory, just a profound weariness and a strange serenity. Outside, the SUVs remained parked where they had been left. No attempt to return, no sound, only the occasional creaking of the metal as it cooled down. What Ethan didn't know was that, while he was silent, something was already happening miles away. The first to feel it was the man who had led the invasion. He was walking alone along the back road, getting further and further away from the ranch, when a sharp pain shot through his chest. He fell to his knees on the cold asphalt, breathing heavily. He tried to stand. He couldn't. His thoughts were confused, jumbled, as if old voices were screaming all at once inside his head. Hours later, he was found by a truck driver, lying by the side of the road, alive, but in deep shock. He couldn't speak. He only repeated an incomprehensible phrase, almost whispered, "It wasn't ours. It never was ours." Another of the men, the one who had first felt the chill, arrived home before dawn. He went into the bathroom, tried to wash his face, but when he looked in the mirror, he began to tremble. He would swear even today that he saw someone behind him, not a threat, but a firm gaze, impossible to hold. He ran out of the house that same morning and voluntarily turned himself into the county police. He confessed to old crimes that no one could connect him to. He signed everything without resistance. He simply said, "I need to settle my accounts." A third man disappeared completely. His phone was found days later, broken and discarded, on the side of a highway. He was never seen again. No concrete evidence, no definitive explanation. Meanwhile, the abandoned vehicles on the ranch quickly became a local topic of conversation. The following morning, a distant neighbor drove by the dirt road, saw the SUVs, and alerted the sheriff. When the police arrived, they found something strange. The cars were intact, with no signs of typical mechanical sabotage. Dead batteries, electrical systems rendered unusable, as if they had simply died. "I've seen cars burned," said one of the police officers. "I've seen cars sabotaged, but this, never." Ethan was interrogated for hours. He told everything, every detail, without exaggeration, without dramatization, just facts. His calm tone was more unsettling than any nervousness. "So you're saying they left, walking?" the sheriff asked. "They did," Ethan replied, "by their own choice. And nobody threatened? Nobody shot?" "They tried," Ethan said. "They didn't succeed." The official report never mentioned prayer. It never mentioned presence. It never mentioned anything beyond unexplained withdrawal. But the police officers were talking amongst themselves. One of them, the older one, stood in front of the wooden cross for several minutes before leaving. He touched it with 2 fingers and shook his head, as if acknowledging something that isn't written in a report. In the days that followed, other farmers began to speak up. Some swore they saw strange men walking the roads that night, looking dejected, frightened, as if they had survived something too big to explain. Others said that for hours their radios failed. Animals were restless. Dogs barked at nothing. None of this made the news, but the impact was real. The gang simply stopped operating in that region. Lands that were to be seized were not. Threats ceased. People who lived in fear began to sleep with their doors unlocked again. Ethan continued his life as usual. He woke up early. He worked the land. He prayed silently. He didn't tell his story to anyone except those who needed to. He never presented himself as a witness to anything extraordinary. He never sought recognition. When asked why he didn't sell the farm after that, he would simply reply, "I'm not finished here yet." But there was something he kept to himself. On the 3rd night after the invasion, Ethan woke suddenly, feeling such a profound peace that he had to sit up in bed. There were no dreams. There were no voices, only the clear, unwavering certainty that this had only been the beginning. The ending of that story had not yet been fully revealed, and when it came, nobody would be prepared. 2 weeks have passed since the night the gang left the ranch on foot. Silence returned to the farm, but it wasn't the same silence as before. There was something different in the air, not threatening, but watchful. Ethan felt it every morning as he walked to the corral, as he repaired fences, as he paused for a few seconds before the wooden cross, before starting his day. Deep down, he knew that it wasn't over yet. On the morning of October 3rd, 2014, the sky dawned cloudy and heavy, as if announcing something. Ethan woke with a tightness in his chest, an unease that didn't stem from fear but from intuition. He made coffee, opened the Bible without choosing a page, as he always did, and read only one sentence before closing the book again. Do not be afraid. Shortly after 9 o'clock, an unfamiliar pickup truck appeared on the dirt road. Ethan stopped what he was doing and watched. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the neighbors. The vehicle was moving too slowly for someone with good intentions, and too fast for someone who was lost. The pickup truck stopped before the gate. Only one man got off the bus. Ethan recognized him immediately. He was the gang leader, but it wasn't the same man. His body seemed thinner. His shoulders, once firm, were now hunched. His gaze, which had once held a challenge, now avoided confrontation. He took a few steps and stopped, keeping his distance, as if he didn't dare advance without permission. "I didn't come here to do any harm," he said, before Ethan could even say anything. Her voice was hoarse, broken. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He just watched. "I needed to go back," the man continued. "I haven't been able to sleep since that night. I can't move on." He ran a hand over his face, nervously. Everything started going wrong after that. Everything. People distanced themselves. Things came to light. I tried to ignore it, but she swallowed hard. "I saw things that night that I can't get out of my head." The wind blew lightly, swaying the wooden cross. "What do you want?" Ethan finally asked. The man took a deep breath. "I want to know." He paused. "I want to know who was there." The silence between the two was profound. Ethan took a few steps forward, stopping near the gate. "You already know," he replied. The man closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, tears streamed down his face without him trying to hide them. "I didn't deserve to leave there alive," he said. "None of us did." He took something out of his jacket pocket and placed it on the ground, pushing it with his foot towards the gate. It was a thick folder full of documents, names, places, lands seized, people hurt, deaths that were never investigated. Everything we did, everything I ordered to be done. Ethan didn't touch the folder. "Take this to the police," he said. "I'll go," the man replied. "But first, I needed to come here." He looked up, straight at Ethan. "That night, when everything failed, when the weapons didn't work," the voice faltered, "I felt someone look at me like no one ever had before. Not with hatred, with truth." He took a deep breath. "If that was Jesus," she said, almost in a whisper, "then I need to know if there's still a chance for me." Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he simply said, "There always is, but not in the way you imagine." The man nodded. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't try to justify anything. He simply got into his truck and drove away, leaving the briefcase there. Ethan collected the documents later and did what he said he would do. He handed everything over to the authorities. The impact was immediate. Investigations were reopened. Arrests were made. Land was returned. People who lived in fear finally began to speak out, but the price was not small. The night after delivering the documents, Ethan woke up with severe chest pains. He was rushed to the county hospital. Doctors said it was a serious warning sign. His heart was weak. The stress, his age, his body taking its toll. "You need to slow down," the doctor said. "Maybe sell the farm. Rest." Ethan listened to everything in silence. When he was alone in his room, he closed his eyes and said a short prayer. He didn't ask for healing. He only asked for clarity. The following morning, when the sun streamed through the hospital window, he found out the end was near. But it wouldn't be tragic. It would be complete. Ethan Miller returned to the ranch 3 days later. The doctors didn't hide the seriousness of the situation. They said his heart was fragile, that new episodes could happen at any moment, that life from then on would demand limits. But Ethan listened to everything with the serenity of someone who had already made peace with something bigger. When the hospital truck dropped him off on the dirt road, the sun was already beginning to set. Just like that first night, the ranch was untouched, silent, waiting. He walked slowly to the house, leaning on the porch railing for support. The dog came to greet him, wagging its tail as if nothing had happened. Ethan smiled. That night he didn't turn on the light. quiet. She sat at the kitchen table, bathed only in the light streaming through the window, opened her father's Bible, the same one as always, and remained silent for a few minutes. She didn't read. She didn't ask for anything. She just stayed there. Shortly before midnight, he got up with effort and walked to the gate. The wooden cross still stood firm, despite the time. Ethan touched it with his fingertips, feeling its rough texture. The field was too quiet. No sound, no wind. He took a deep breath. "Everything's fine," she said in a low voice, as if answering someone. He knelt slowly on the same ground where it had all begun weeks before. There was no pain. There was no fear. Just a profound sense of rest. When the neighbors noticed the lack of activity at the ranch the following morning, they called the sheriff. Ethan was found right there, kneeling, his hand still resting on the cross. The county doctor stated that it had been quick, a final effort of the heart, without suffering, but there was something that left everyone speechless. Ethan's face held no expression of pain. It held peace. In the following days, the story began to circulate, first in whispers, then in hushed conversations. Police officers commented on it. Truck drivers repeated it. Farmers confirmed it. The gang never returned. More than that, it ceased to exist. Investigations based on the documents handed over led to the arrest of several members in different states. Others disappeared off the map. Some changed their names. None returned to that county. Months later, a detail came to light. The gang leader, the same one who had returned to the ranch alone, was seen attending a small church in another town. He didn't become a preacher. He didn't give interviews. He always sat in the last pew in silence. When asked about his past, he would only answer, "I survived something I didn't deserve, and I don't intend to waste it." The ranch was not sold. A local foundation took over the land, transforming part of it into a shelter for families threatened by rural violence. Ethan's house remained as it was, simple, untouched, the cross preserved. Some say that on certain afternoons when the sun sets just right, the countryside seems different, lighter, more alive. Others swear that on dirt roads, engines never fail, but people stop, they look, they feel something strange in their chest, and they continue on in silence. No official record mentions Jesus. No report mentions prayer. No concrete evidence explains why armed men fled on foot, why weapons malfunctioned, or why lives changed after that night. But those who live in that region know. You know, sometimes the miracle isn't what you see. It's what prevents the worst from happening. And that night, on a forgotten Texas farm, when an ordinary man decided to pray instead of running away, someone heard, and that was enough.